hear from Alexis in just a minute. So I'm really excited about this topic. GlobalGiving has a lot of partners that work on education in some form or another, and pretty much everyone takes a different approach. And for a lot of you, that means working really closely with the communities that you seek to serve. So as I'm sure you know, education isn't just about educating the students that show up to class every morning. It's also about involving the parents and the school administrators, training the teachers, working with local governments, maybe groups of local elders. So really making sure that everyone in the community is involved in a way that makes your education program a success. And with that, I'm really excited to introduce Alexis. As I mentioned, she's the co-founder of Youth Potential South Africa. She's got more than 16 years of experience working with nonprofits in the United States and across Africa. She actually used to work with Wiser Girls, which is another GlobalGiving partner that's quite active working with girls in Kenya. So Alexis, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and I'm controlling the slides, so just let me know when you'd like me to move along.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. It's wonderful to be with all of you. As Miranda said, my name is Alexis, and I'm joining you here from South Africa today. I'm the co-founder of Youth Potential South Africa. And Youth Potential South Africa paves the way to awaken the potential and purpose of South African youth. Our organization is offering weekly literacy and creative youth empowerment programs to disadvantaged children and youth in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa. We partner with rural schools and farms in the area, and these programs that we offer, they're a very necessary supplement to the meager education that the children get in their schools. And we're the only education nonprofit in a very vast municipal area. I think most of us in this sector all over the world know that education is not what it needs to be. And here in South Africa, everybody knows that our education system is in an absolute crisis. It's just not working at all to serve the children and youth. Unfortunately, in our rural schools in the country, the schools and the teachers focus only on rote learning of information. And this is like putting a plant into sterile water without any nutrients. Education is, as we see it, a holistic development that addresses every person, every aspect of a child's life. We can move to the second slide, Miranda. Thanks. YUPSA's programs nurture and grow social emotional skills and problem solving, creative and critical thinking skills in disadvantaged children and youth. Skills, as I mentioned before, are not developed at all in their schooling or in their communities. And we believe that every child and youth has the right to develop into an effective and happy adult. So as stakeholders in education, we need to prepare them to lead a responsible adult life. The world absolutely needs well-rounded children that can create meaning and purpose in their own life. So the result of education, we believe, should be that children and youth become people who are kind, who are able to think, who are ethical, who are competent, and who can contribute meaningfully and positively to their community. At YUPSA, we also feel that the core of education is to develop literacy in children as early as possible and throughout their school career. Literacy is much broader than decoding or even reading for meaning. Literacy includes listening, interpreting, understanding information, remembering, analyzing information, and also creating information. abilities that many children around the world do not receive through their schooling. Literacy activates our imagination and develops our thinking processes. It helps us develop empathy and learn problem solving and self-reflection. And we feel that from this, children's curiosity naturally springs to life, and then they will be inspired to become lifelong learners themselves. Our experience at UPSA, as well as research, shows that the best age to influence a child and make a lasting impact is the primary school years. And after about the ages of 11 or 12, it becomes much more difficult to make changes in a child's outlook and in their attitudes. That's why at UPSA we focus our programs mainly on the primary school children. We do, however, give programs to older children and youth because they also certainly need to be supported in many ways. We can go to the next slide. This is a beautiful picture of a child at one of the schools that I partner with at UPSA. So you can see the broken window. I was thinking about the structural challenges that Miranda was talking about in her emails. Of course, we have many in South Africa, as I'm sure you do in your own places in the world where your projects are. Here in the rural area where you also work, there are no functioning libraries or school libraries at all in the area. And unfortunately, on top of that, school teachers also show very little interest in reading. Therefore, they can't inspire the love of reading and a whole lot of other skills in a child. So one of the things we've done at UPSA to address this is that we have developed what we call the Words Can Change Worlds literacy program. And the core of this program is mobile village libraries and reading clubs. It's a program that's outside of the school context, so children can meet together with a strong bag of books containing 30 to 35 beautiful books for all ages in the 3 local languages, and it's managed by youth librarians in their village. Outside of this, children and youth in the area have no access to books. Another challenge that we struggle with in our rural area and across the country actually is there's a widely held belief that children are not educatable. In particular, rural children are not educatable, and people give up on them actually. Even the Department of Education often advises teachers to ignore children with learning difficulties and rather focus on those who are achieving good results. Most teachers as well in our rural areas have insufficient qualifications or skills to deal with many of the challenges in the schools. And then as it shows on the slide, the children in this area are exposed to drugs, alcohol abuse, HIV/AIDS, daily domestic violence, and there's a high level of neglect and malnourishment. And on top of that, the schools that they attend give them little to no opportunity to develop themselves further. And it's virtually impossible for them to escape these circumstances. So at UPSA, we provide, through our programs, we provide a safe environment and a conducive environment with trusting relationships. We feel that's really key to develop trusting relationships where learning is fun, 100% fun. And in these empowering programs, children naturally develop new skills, and they also learn to express themselves freely. And from that, they can envision a different future, a better future for themselves. I think we can go to the next slide, Miranda. Okay. This is a lovely picture of a mother and a child reading in their homes. They're part of our mobile reading clubs program that I mentioned before. I wanted to just share some things that we do to work with the communities and bring them into our programs, work together to develop programs. So we find that at the beginning, most importantly, is to find out both the challenges and the needs in the local community so that we can design a relevant program. And we place a lot of emphasis on building trusting relationships over a long period of time and communicating frequently with all of the stakeholders who are part of these programs. We visit people's homes quite a bit, as much as possible. And we also spend a lot of time attending community meetings and events, just fitting into the community and being part of the daily fabric of the communities. We feel that it's much better to teach a man to fish than to just supply a person continuously with fish. So we find it's important that children learn the skills themselves to look after themselves and to learn ways to develop a better life for themselves and their families. It's much more valuable and sustainable when children and youth can develop their own attitudes and skills than just giving them only material things, which eventually go away. So some of the tips that we have at UPSA for making a program that has a real impact in the community are visiting children's homes, getting to know the family, and also seeing what their living situation is like. As I already mentioned, building trusting relationships over a long period of time, communicating frequently. Also very important to respect people's beliefs and also their way of doing things. Also to understand the challenges that children and families are facing in their communities. And as I mentioned, attend community events. It's a lot of fun as well to see what children are doing in their communities, and to keep a long-term perspective, because especially in this side of the world, nothing happens quickly, but change does happen after a period of time. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, these are some of the youth leaders in one of UPSA's leadership and team building programs. And I just wanted to say a few words about making an impact and hopefully getting some lasting results from our education programs. And one of the ways that we set ourselves up to ensure lasting results from our programs at UPSA is to build teams of youth and teacher and also school management leaders, and concentrate on imparting skills and developing skills within these leadership groups that they can then pass on to others. We run volunteer trainings as well. We capacitate volunteers through our literacy and youth empowerment volunteer training courses, so they can then scale and replicate our programs in their own community and also mentor others to hopefully do the same. And we find that this model guarantees sustainability and also more impact. We also feel that education is not a top-down exercise. One model of education is more of a banking model where you more or less impose information on children. But we feel that education is necessarily about providing conducive conditions for the potential in a child to unfold. And if we spark a child's inquisitiveness, that naturally gets the ball rolling, and the child will begin to educate themselves because they're curious. And this is another way to ensure sustainability, to develop a child's potential and to develop them into a lifelong learner. So a quote that we really like that this is at the slide from Slayer, an American author. She says that children are not things to be molded, but are built to be unmolded. We also believe that it's much more impactful to concentrate deeply on impacting smaller numbers of children and community members rather than spreading out too thinly. Having the time to give personal attention and build deeper relationships with a few people who can then become role models in their own communities, we feel is much more impactful than reaching thousands, but only marginally. Yeah, I think I'll stop there and turn it over to you, Miranda.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that, Alexis. I think it was super interesting to hear about sort of all the different angles at which you approach working with the community, whether that's, you know, meeting at the children's home and going to events and all the different little ways that really work together to make that happen. So thank you so much for sharing that. I thought that was super enlightening. I would love to hear from all of you in the chat box. If you could take a minute to think about how you involve the community where you support education, whether that's, you know, taking a similar approach as to what Alexis shared or something entirely different. I'll read some of the answers out loud as they come in, and I can start actually. So I'm a longtime volunteer for a GlobalGiving partner called Aid Afghanistan for Education, which has schools for women in Afghanistan, particularly focusing on accelerated and remedial education for women who have missed school for a period of time. And because of the nature of the conservative society in Afghanistan, it's very important to have community buy-in whenever you go and set up a new school. So one thing that we always do when deciding where to set up a new school is to go in and have meetings with the local shuras, which are like the elder groups that sort of govern smaller communities across Afghanistan, and meet with families to make sure, especially that the men in the community are interested in supporting a school. All right, Basumati from India says she works with an organization called QMed. We work with medical students and their teachers. We interact with them a lot on Facebook and at events, and she's planning on starting a Facebook group with focused discussion topics. That sounds awesome. Give folks a few more minutes to think here. All right, Louise, who also works in South Africa. We've partnered with Nali Bali, who builds reading clubs run primarily by the children themselves. That sounds like a lot of fun. We work with the schools and teachers. However, the teachers, let's see, lost my spot. Teachers can be difficult to work with because it can expose their ignorance around certain aspects of education. That sounds pretty challenging. All right, one of the ways we involve the communities where our partner schools are located is by organizing parental meetings every school term. We invite the parents to come to the school for a morning. They share their experiences and we share ours. We include some of the training elements as well, all focused on support for children who are experiencing learning difficulties. We're also looking into ways how we can do wider community outreach. Thank you. That's oh, I'm not going to say your name right, I'm sorry. Anamaki from, let's see, Backup Uganda, I think is the organization that she works with. Yanira is visiting the communities we want to impact and hearing their needs. I think listening to the communities that you work with is super important and definitely a part of all the different approaches that we've talked about. Oh, awesome. Jacqueline from Amazo, which works in Cameroon, says, with great results, we've convinced fathers to get involved in their girls' education. That is quite an accomplishment and super important to have support from the parents, especially the fathers. Yeah, wow. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. Oh, we've got a few more coming in, and then I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, Annette. Let's see. Judy works with Turning Point in Kibera, Kenya. We also have parents meetings and run an annual parenting course to get to know the parents even more. We also work with local churches, which connects us to the wider community. Seems like there's a big theme of, especially trying to connect with parents when working with children. I think working with, partnering with local churches in areas that have a strong faith community can also be really important. Let's see. All right, Halt Poverty, which is working in Madagascar. So let's see, we work with private primary schools to introduce children to lemurs and conservation to join our eco clubs. It's still challenging to involve public schools to join our program. See. Charles, who I believe is also in Kenya, we integrate community service and service learning projects in the daily curriculum that suits both parents and teachers. Good. Francis. All right, Francis organizes Show Your Skill Day, where parents and the community come to witness the level of knowledge gained by the children. So that sounds like a lot of fun, sort of putting on a community event to show off all that the children have learned. This has already given me a lot to think about, so thank you everyone for sharing those. If you have other thoughts that come in, please do put those in the chat. And if anyone has any questions for Alexis, you can go ahead and put those in the Q&A box and we will address those in a little bit. And in the meantime, I'm super excited to introduce Annette Scarpita. As I said, I think she's been a project leader for about 4 different GlobalGiving partner organizations over the last 7 or 8 years, maybe. She can correct me on that. But she's 8 years, wow. So she's worked with communities all over Africa, especially with smaller nonprofits, maximizing impact and raising visibility. She's a lot of interesting perspectives on working with a gender lens. She comes from a communications background. So Annette does it all. So I'm really excited for her to share the story of her working with an organization in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So Annette, if you want to turn on your sound, I will turn it over to you. See, I can turn on your sound. I can't hear you just yet.
I got it.
Oh, all right, perfect.
Great.
Sounds
thank
great.
you, Miranda, and thank you to all the GlobalGiving team for inviting me here. Alexis, I'm awed by the progress of your own program and wish I could claim the same for mine. We started from scratch, basically. We wanted to serve a community that was experiencing a lot of hardship. We did not have and do not have ample funding to really change things dramatically. It's within the public school system, parochial school actually, and it's rooted in extreme bureaucracy. Our hands are tied for a lot of it. So part of our goal was to raise up children who had been stigmatized because they were born out of sexual violence. Actually, can you go to the second slide, please, Miranda? That's the 8th. Oh, wait, sorry. Yes, that's the one. Yeah, so vulnerable children were not welcome at school. So if nothing else, they would get some primary education because the quality of teaching, of education, was not good. And I know a lot of you share that challenge. But to make them feel self-worth, to gain respect of their fellow students and of the wider community, that was a big goal. So it wasn't, you know, make things perfect, get a great education. It was just get more respect and at least a little bit of usable education. So Renetta is a teeny tiny village, and you'll see it highlighted in the upper right hand corner. Lubrizi is the head of the village cluster. I've been to both places and it is very challenging. There are long-running tensions between two ethnic groups. They were definitely involved in the Congo Wars earlier, and there's still tension remaining. So there's not all in all fighting as in an active war, but tensions are still there. Women have been prone to sexual violence, and the resulting pregnancies provide us with many of our students now. So Renana also has no infrastructure, so the challenges are huge. So this is what we found coming to Renana. Next slide, please. Okay, so we pulled the mothers at the very beginning, at the inception of our project, and they said that other than income generation provision, which was outside our financial means, the #1 request was education for their children. So initially we provided the basics: school fees, uniform, shoes, school supplies. And these are children who otherwise wouldn't gain education. Their mothers had no means of doing it, not even for the modest fees. Uniforms are required of every student, and if they didn't have uniforms, they couldn't attend school. So I know one of the kids that became a superstar of sorts was literally standing outside the gates of the school until she got admitted. Not for credit, but she got admitted. So people are very anxious to get an education. Next slide, please. Okay, so we got to work and we expanded our program from the basics to supplementary services and programming. The one that we were most proud of was a summer program for rising first graders, get them a general introduction to school so it wouldn't be so drastic when they came, and Sport for Peace. They used what's called a football 3 methodology, which means it's not as much who wins the game, but how they play. Learning respect and mutual respect and admiration for all team members. So that's a good way of integrating all ethnicities and social backgrounds. The other thing we had was a supplemental learning program for struggling students, and that was after school, I think 2 or 3 days a week. That was supposed to be for students who are having a hard time in class. As you can imagine, the teachers at the school taught to one level, did not recognize other unique student needs. And so if a student didn't get it while addressing the entire class, the teacher had an opportunity to go over again the points that may have been missed. Next slide, please. Okay, so we discovered that there were some irregularities. We discovered that, first of all, the the programs were not being implemented as we thought. The field manager in between visits was not aware initially that those supplemental programs weren't being carried out anymore. The teachers who we paid a modest fee to were resisting, calling for more money. And one persistent problem that has always been present is the thought that we at Sofeco were there to support them indefinitely for each of their children up until college, through college. And they didn't have to do a thing. Not the school. It's as if we were expected to pay salaries. It's as if we were considered in charge of the school, and that was absolutely not the case. We tried to relay that, but it just didn't sink in. So with all this lack of accountability, we decided to take things into our own hands and approach things differently. You know, a lot of the international programs that I'm familiar with trust in local community leaders. Renetta didn't really have one to fight for the good of the people and the progress that the people can make toward independent, sustainable living. Usually that could be the school leader or a pastor. The pastor was involved in Sports to Peace, and he was one who just didn't do the programming anymore. So he was as resistant as the teachers. Next slide, please. Okay, so Sofeco got a new operations manager who descended to the village and said, listen, you're not really with the program here. We need you to get with it or we're going away. And we were fully prepared to do that. The community was in somewhat of a shock and pledged that they would get better, and so we were in wait and see mode for a while. And it just seemed like they weren't making enough progress. They were still taking things for granted. Next slide, please. So what we did was, and this is our pivotal turning point, we put less of our emphasis on the school staff, which really wasn't doing anything for us. We decided to change our emphasis and our attention and resources to the parents. There is a new parent committee formed and elected just to monitor our program, to save the education of their children. We offered an extensive parent training on their roles and responsibilities as parents of young school children. And finally, we started literacy and human rights training for the mothers. The vast majority of mothers either had very little primary education or had never set foot in a classroom. So this is a photo of the first class with their new materials. They're as proud as they could possibly be, and we were proud of them. Next slide, please. Okay, so we had a series of oral autobiographies at the end of the classes, and we saw serious transformations. The mothers were more vested in their children's education, having had a taste of their own classroom experience. This training program was so hot that there were clamors for more, and we made our way through every woman in the village who wanted this program. And the teacher was of our secondary program, so she was now in teaching mode. So the mothers were now helping out their kids. Their testimonials are amazing, and the life changes are startling. Next slide, please. Okay, so great literacy program, but it doesn't really advance them in the way we'd like to see for that income generation that we received a request for at the very beginning. We started permaculture gardening as part of life skills, and only women who had completed the literacy classes were eligible, so we liked that. A new Women's Oversight and Leadership Committee was elected. They took their responsibilities very seriously. We paid them a modest monthly fee, representative of both ethnicities, and in fact, a lot of our women work together across ethnic lines, which really is a good example shown to the men. So the permaculture program itself raised awareness of climate change, sustainable care for the earth. Next slide. Wait, hold on. Sorry. Go back for a second. The woman in the top photo is actually a student of the classroom who later becomes a manager, reinforcing what has been taught by the permaculture experts. So this is a mapping that he did to portray the village structure. Okay, go ahead. Next slide. Okay, so we're almost at the end. We advanced to the next season. The seeds had been planted and the plants grow. And they are completely ecstatic. They have learned this new permaculture gardening technique. And at the same time, we introduced a livestock production facet to our program. So goats and chickens were distributed. These are, the kids are plugging their ears because they never heard a goat bleat before, and they're just really ecstatic, and they're finding independence and the way forward for the first time. So you'll see in the bottom right corner a picture of one of the women distributing chickens that have spawned from other chickens to distribute to other members of the community, which was their agreement. Okay, next slide. Is that the last one?
Oh,
yes.
I think that was your last one.
That's my last one. And so we're kind of in the transition point right now of, yes, you're on your own. Let's see how many of you can come up with school fees for yourself, for your own children, and live independently, because as we've told them, we're not there forever. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Annette. I just love this story because I think it is really, really hard as a nonprofit to recognize when something isn't working, especially if it's, at the core of your mission is to, focus on educating children, and to realize that maybe that's not going to work, but what else can we do, and sort of come at it from a different angle. I think that's a really excellent example of, admitting to something not working, but the program itself is not a failure because you've still had a lot of success working with the mothers and in different aspects of education there. So thank you so much for sharing that, Annette.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. If any of you have questions for Annette, you can go ahead and drop those in the Q&A box at the bottom, and we'll get to those in a little bit. I'd love to hear from any of you that have experienced resistance in the community before. And maybe it's the case where you haven't really had to deal with that, and that's totally fine. But if you have, I think the group would love to hear just briefly in the chat box if you have experienced any resistance, how you handled that. I'm chuckling at Basamathi's answer here. So So if you're not familiar, her organization focuses on education for medical students and in India. And she says, in our early days, when we said that we teach medicos how to correctly conduct online searching process, we were met with the incredulous look of, what can you teach us? And it took a lot of proving that you could, and you did have something to offer there. How did you manage to prove that, Basmati? How did you convince them? Free lectures. All right, Louise, who works in South Africa, said they deal with a lot of challenges, like being accused of being satanic because the kids wear badges. Oh no. Problems with jealousy and gossip. And how do you handle that, Louise? Okay, so it looks like, okay, yeah, it seems like Louise takes a similar approach as the approaches shared by Alexis about attending community meetings, spreading the word about the program and the benefits of it, speaking to chiefs, parent meetings. Good, good. Okay, so Anna's referencing something that that Alexis also mentioned about facing resistance out of ignorance about learning difficulties. So Back Up Uganda focuses specifically on children with learning difficulties, and you know, the idea that my child is dull, so I don't need to invest in their education. It's hard to reach parents who think this way because they also feel like our meetings and trainings about how to help children who experience difficulties in learning will not help them anyway. Right. Al Santoli, who works in the Philippines, says it's important to stay humble but consistent, with an emphasis on inviting continuous dialogue with parents and teachers. Okay. Okay, Louise's point about handling resistance, especially when dealing with gossip or things of that nature, is to educate the children, and they will then pass that information to the adults, which is interesting. Let's see. Jacqueline says, initially the fathers in the village were our biggest skeptics, and this was based on their experience with the systematic failure of, it seems like, the education program for their girls. We brought them to become believers because of the success of our program, and now they're our biggest advocates. That's really excellent, Jacqueline. Congratulations. Let's see, from Halt Poverty in Madagascar, we've experienced resistance from the local guides community during our initial capacity training program for our eco guides. We sit together with our local partners, the national parks, the tourism board, with representatives of the mayor in the region, good, working with the local government and other community organizations to make that happen. And all right, it was decided to send our tour guides to lead itineraries where the senior local guides aren't working. Good. Good. Thank you, everyone, for sharing that. It sounds like you know, everyone has sort of dealt with resistance in some way or another, and I think a quality of a resilient and responsive organization is being able to, you know, figure out how to address that and keep moving forward as much as possible. So I think there's a lot we can learn from each other, specifically around this piece. Thank you for sharing that. We have a couple questions that have come in so far, so I'm going to go through those. And if you have any questions for Annette or Alexis or anyone else, go ahead and drop those in the Q&A box right now. All right, Vasumati has a question that, let's see, I think this is maybe for Alexis, but anyone else can hop in here too. She says, how did you manage to make the parents come to meetings? Organizing events seems to be such a challenge when there's no compulsion to come. Alexis, would you like to answer that?
Okay. We don't have a set schedule for meeting parents, so maybe it's a little bit different from what you're talking about. Schools definitely have issues getting parents to meetings. We find the way we meet the most parents is just by visiting them in their homes rather than parent meetings. Or if we have an event with food, that definitely gets people out, and we do that from time to time to talk about our programs with the children. And we're also planning an event at the end of this year in conjunction with a creche where we hold our programs. So an end of the year, like show your skill event that will make a party.
All right, thank you. Vasumati, let us know if that answers that question for you. Let's see. Anne has a question for Annette. She asks, so Anne works with Backup Uganda. She says, I'm curious, are you still running the after-school program for children who have difficulty learning? If yes, how is it going?
Unfortunately, no, we're not. The teachers who were responsible for doing it weren't doing it as we thought. So that has ended, and that's a good example of taking our efforts away from the school and putting it in the hands of the parents, especially the mothers who are now working with their children. Now, a lot of them aren't qualified to help them with the harder topics, but they are working with them, reading with them for the benefit of both themselves and their children, and paying better respect, better attention to their children's education. So I wish, but no.
Right. We have a question from Francis. Let's see. Francis says there's interest in our community to send their kids to school, but families can't afford the payment. So how do we get around this? Would either Annette or Alexis like to answer that question?
Well, this was a big incentive for us to start the program to begin with, and that's where our funding was put, school fees so that the children could attend school. Yeah. The other thing that I thought the question was going here, but it didn't quite, is I hear all the time, well, we only have money to educate one child, and of course that child is going to be a boy. And so of all the mothers in the literacy classes, pretty much every one of them said, well, I couldn't attend school, my brothers did instead, because after all, what good, the feeling is, what good is a woman since she's going to settle down, have children, put the priority with the boys. And we responded by educating, by prioritizing at least half, if not more, of our supported students as girls.
Very good.
Yeah, I just have one other thing to offer from my experience in Kenya, especially. This was a challenge for most families. I was working with the school fees, and I think the premise of the income generating program that Annette and others are offering is even before the income generating activity is the ability to make ideas and see and talk, and the coming together of people to make ideas, and developing that habit of making ideas to solve the problem, which is school fees for my child. For example, I would encourage many parents where I lived in Mahuru Bay, even to make the step of go and talk to the principal. If you want your child to go to school, don't stop at I don't have the money. First, go and speak to a principal or school manager and see if anything comes out of that conversation. I know you collect firewood, for example. Would that principal allow you to bring firewood that you've collected to school because the school needs firewood to do the cooking for the children as a starting point, and see what other ideas come out of that conversation?
I can add to that. That is that the student I mentioned who was standing outside the gates of the school for lack of money, she actually went out and tried to sell firewood for her fees. No one would buy the wood. So unfortunately that didn't work.
All right, I have a message from Al Santoli that I'm going to read out loud for everyone. He says, so Al works in the Philippines. Says, to bring in parents, I try to always talk with the elders as the first step, and any senior leaders of civil and religious authorities in the area. If the elders believe what you're doing is a good idea, they will encourage the parents to be involved. So we work in areas of climate calamities and armed conflict. Our presence is a statement of solidarity, which also builds trust regardless of the negative attitudes and bad habits caused by severe poverty and corruption from local officials. And he also added that one should establish benchmarks to determine which communities are too dangerous and establish model communities where change is possible as an example to everyone. All right, folks, I think these are all the questions that we've had come in. If we've missed anything, this is your last chance to get those in before the end of the session. We've got just a couple minutes left. And usually this is the part of the call where I would sort of summarize what we've learned, but I think this is an interesting part of the call like this is that we've all probably learned something different from it. So if you're able to share in the chat box how you're thinking you can apply what you've learned today to your organization's work, I think we would all love to hear that. In other words, what is your next step after you finish up today?
I can say very quickly what we'd like to do next if we have the resources, and that is bring in the fathers, which is a huge task. We already have some who are supporting especially the women's income generating projects. And there's another one I just lost. I'll think of it.
All right, we've got a few chats coming in here. Al says, working on the education of parents, especially mothers, because that enhances the holistic education for any community. Let's see. Anne says, I'm going to look into involving the parents more in monitoring what is happening in school, especially in retention, or especially in relation to what we do, support for children with learning difficulties. There's a Parent Teachers Association, but I think we may be able to do more with parents if we can get more creative. Basmati says, trying to meet students in their medical school hostel common rooms and having discussion sessions. Love that. It's very important to meet people where they are, and that is, I think that is the medical student version of meeting children's parents in their home. Let's see. All right. All right. So Jacqueline asked a question that Francis also asked earlier, basically asking, we would like to have a collaboration with the partnership with a collaboration or partnership with some of the nonprofit partners who are on the call. So I will, after this is over later today, I will work on getting an email sent around to everyone, and you can go ahead if you'd like to be put in touch with the other people who are on this call. You can just let me know, and I can make those introductions for you. Go ahead and continue sharing your final takeaways in the chat. I'm going to finish up with just a couple things here. So I want to give a big warm thank you especially to Alexis and Annette for working so hard on putting together these great presentations for you all, and especially for thinking about different ways to think about your work and pivoting and taking a really holistic approach to educating the communities that you work in. So thank you both, especially, and to everyone who joined today. Yeah, I think this was one of my favorite peer learning calls this year.
Yay!
I do have a quick survey that's going to show up on your Zoom screen in just a minute. If you could answer that just real quick, it's just 4 questions. Answering these questions helps us at GlobalGiving make the Peer Learning Network better every month. So I'd really appreciate it if you can just give some quick feedback there. And while you're doing that, oh, it's not going on. All right, so as far as next month, so we are actually not going to have a Peer Learning Network session in October. We will have one in November, but the reason we are not going to have one in October is because we are running the Online Fundraising Academy. And so that is a 4-week short course on all things online fundraising. This is perfect for organizations who are looking to sort of boost up their fundraising skills before the end of the year fundraising season, like Giving Tuesday. This is an intermediate course, so it should be, hopefully, your organization has a decent understanding already of some of the key elements of online fundraising. So this is run over the course of 4 weeks, 4 1-hour webinars that will be run at the same time that this webinar is held. So stay tuned for that. We're planning to structure them very similarly to the Peer Learning Network, with sharing experiences from different nonprofits in the topic. So Malene is going to share the registration link in the chat box, and I'll also include it in the follow-up email. So we'd love if you could join that. I think it's going to be really interesting and a lot to learn before the year-end fundraising season. All right. Wonderful. Yeah, so we're planning to cover digital fundraising strategy, donor acquisition, long-term donor retention, and how to measure your success. So this will be over the course of the entire month of October. And Malene just shared those links with you. And that's all we have for today. Big thank you to everyone who joined, especially to Alexis and Annette for being very brave and sharing their experiences on the call. I really appreciate all the work all of you are doing all over the world. So yeah, hopefully we'll see you at the Online Fundraising Academy, and if not, the Peer Learning Network in November. So thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day.